Israeli naval forces have intercepted dozens of boats that were part of a flotilla of more than 40 vessels carrying aid to Gaza. Israel says the ships were safely stopped and their passengers transferred to Israel, from where they will be deported back to Europe. The activists who were detained say their vessels were seized illegally in international waters.
You're seeing an Israeli Navy vessel near one of the flotilla boats sailing towards Gaza. A short while later, it's intercepted. Israeli military officers board the boat and detain the activists on board. And here the same happens on another vessel. The global Sumud Flotilla is made up of more than 40 boats. In total, around 500 people from dozens of countries were on board the vessels. They include politicians, lawyers and activists. Their aim to transport humanitarian aid for Palestinians in Gaza and break the Israeli blockade of the enclave. Israel has previously said the flotilla is violating its, quote, lawful naval blockade, and asked organisers to change course. The Foreign Ministry said it had offered to transfer the aid to Gaza. In a post on X, the ministry said several vessels of what they called a Hamas Sumud flotilla, despite no proven links to the Islamist group, had been, quote, safely stopped, and those aboard were being transferred to an Israeli port. They added, referring to the climate activist Greta Thunberg, Greta and her friends are safe and healthy. In several posts on Telegram, the global Sumud flotilla wrote that Israeli naval forces intercepted and boarded the boats in international waters. They said the interception was an illegal attack on unarmed humanitarians and called on governments and international institutions to demand their immediate safety and release. Several countries have condemned Israel's actions. Turkey's foreign ministry called Israel's, quote, attack on the flotilla an act of terror that endangered the lives of innocent civilians. Malaysia's Prime Minister wrote that Israel has shown utter contempt not only for the rights of the Palestinian people, but also for the conscience of the world. The UK's Foreign Office said it was very concerned about the situation. Ireland's Prime Minister, the Taoiseach, described the developments as very concerning. Spain's Prime Minister said all Spanish citizens had full diplomatic protection. Israel's actions against the flotilla sparked protests in several countries, including here in Greece, in Argentina, and in Malaysia. In Italy, unions have called a national strike on Friday in support of the flotilla.
Well, for more, I'm joined now by Omer Shatz. He's a lecturer in international law and a counsel at the International Criminal Court. He joins us tonight from Brussels. Mr. Shatz, it's good to have you with us. Israel has boarded flotilla vessels, as activists have said, in international waters. Greta Thunberg has claimed that Israel abducted activists on board. How do you see this? How would you describe what happened?
Yeah, so Israel claims that it's a lawful blockade on Gaza, which includes enforcement in high seas in international waters, which otherwise enjoy freedom of navigation and non-interception of non-military targets. However, even if this siege was lawful, there are rules to this siege, and one based on the Geneva Conventions and the San Remo Manual, which must ensure the free passage of aid to population under under occupation. Under international law, such a siege will be prohibited if the purpose is to starve or deny objects essential for the survival of the population, and it will be also prohibited, and here it's where I think it's applicable, if the damage to the civilian population is excessive compared to the military advantage anticipated from this blockade. So what we are under international maritime law and under international humanitarian law, they must ensure the and lastly, yes. If the population is inadequately provided with essential means, then they must ensure this free passage, but they have a right to search and they have a right to visit the boats and to ensure that this is in compliance, that they don't pass arms and so on, but they have an obligation under international law to provide a free passage of humanitarian and medical aid.
So, Mr. Shatz, I want to be clear on this. So you're saying then that what we saw with the interception of these vessels, this is a violation of international law?
It's a stark violation of international law, because you have to remember also, this is not a siege that was imposed as a result of the atrocities of October 7th. This is a siege that is imposed for almost 20 years. For example, you remember, I'm sure, the 2010 Marmara Flotilla. It was imposed back then. There was no war. But it's a military occupation of the Palestinian territories, and therefore the occupying power has obligation to ensure the free passage of medical and humanitarian aid, just as Israel has an obligation to do so on land, right? So
well, what about what Israel
occupying power.
What about what Israel says, though, that the naval blockade of the Gaza Strip is needed to prevent Hamas from importing weapons into the territory?
Exactly. This is why I said that on the one hand, they must allow free passage, including through maritime passage to the Gaza Strip, but they have a right to board the ship, to search, and to see and ensure that there is no arms there. Israel itself said that as you reported, they invited to transfer the humanitarian aid from the boats to Gaza through Ashdod. So it means that even Israel acknowledged that what they have on board is humanitarian aid and not arms or anything that will breach the siege on Hamas.
Do you think then, Mr. Shatz, that there will be any consequences for Israel? Because according to international law, as you're saying, there were no weapons on these vessels. They should have been allowed safe passage to Gaza. That did not happen. Will there be any repercussions for Israel?
Yeah, I can think of like three consequences come to mind. First, there is the ICJ opinion from July 2024 that declared the occupation of Palestine as unlawful per se. If the military occupation based on which the siege was imposed is unlawful per se and must be terminated according to the International Court of Justice, also the siege is unlawful in this context. And we have also the ICJ decision, the provisional measures from January 2024 in the case of South Africa against Israel, where the court said that one of the measures was to allow humanitarian aid to the 2 million people of Gaza. And in this will have another consequences in this case, this incident. And lastly, I remind you that after the Marmara, which flew a Comoro flag, the International Criminal Court had a case on the Marmara incident and qualified what happened there as a war crime. And we have the ICC finding reasonable grounds to believe that Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war, based on which they issued the arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant. And therefore, in the ICC, we can expect all the boats that flew flags of states that are party to the ICC can take this case to this court.
Okay. Mr. Omer Shatz, we appreciate your time and your valuable legal analysis of the situation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, and have a good evening.
Let's explore the legal aspects of this and bring in Alexander Gilder. He's an associate professor of international law and security at the University of Reading. Welcome to DW. Now, the activists say they were intercepted illegally in international waters. Israel says they were violating a, quote, lawful naval blockade. Who is right?
Well, Israel only has complete jurisdiction 12 miles off its coast, and the interceptions, many of them have been taking place 70, 80 nautical miles off the coast. These are international waters. International law recognizes freedom of navigation for all vessels, and states can only board vessels in the high seas in those international waters if the ship is engaged in piracy, the slave trade, or is not flying a flag. Otherwise, Israel cannot board these vessels.
The legality of the blockade has long been a subject of debate. How do you see it?
Yes, opinions on the blockade and its legal foundations are split. But regardless of even getting into what type of conflict we're seeing here and the technical legal aspects of the blockade, prohibiting entry of humanitarian vessels would be a disproportionate response anyway, and raise questions around Israel's adherence to binding obligations to allow the flow of humanitarian aid to the civilian population.
From what I'm hearing you say, this was not a legal seizure then. They did enter the vessels in international waters. What consequences could Israel face here?
Yeah, in my view, yes, this is unlawful. It's slightly different for the conflicting reports around the vessel that made it into the 12 nautical miles off the coast. But yes, the majority of these interceptions, I would say, are unlawful. Now, the question of what will happen here is really down to how far other states wish to escalate this diplomatically. As long as Israel is detaining and deporting these humanitarian workers, I don't see European states in particular taking much stronger stances in terms of deploying military vessels to respond. I think that those states would like to continue to protect their relationships and will denounce these actions, but not go much further.
Some European countries did send frigates to escort their citizens on the flotilla, only up to a certain distance from the shore. Then they called on the activists to turn around and themselves left. What does the law tell us about countries' obligations to protect their citizens in international waters?
So the ships all are flying flags, and the flag states involved have jurisdiction over those vessels. They're responsible for ensuring that the ships comply with maritime law, but otherwise they can't compel or require a ship to do anything in particular. This doesn't mean that the flag state has to deploy a military vessel to intervene or to intercept another state seeking to interfere. The political reality is that naval deployments are expensive, and as long as Israel, as I said, is looking to detain and then probably deport the people that it's arresting, then I don't see the European states wanting to get into a more serious naval conflict.
As Professor Alexander Gilder, thank you so much for your insights today. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you very much.